Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I booked a cheap Airbnb in Kreuzberg, Berlin, for a 4-night stay in May 2022. I was on a short trip for work and didn't want to spend much. The listing looked decent enough. 1-bedroom flat, older building, high ceilings, and what looked like original floors from before the war. The photos showed a small balcony, a vintage green couch, and a bathroom with old white tiles that had yellowed slightly near the edges. It looked lived in. Not fancy, but fine for a few nights. The host, Daniel, messaged me a few days before my flight. He said he would be traveling during my stay, but that check-in was self-service. The key was in a small lockbox next to the door, and he gave me a code. He wrote that the apartment was on the 3rd floor, facing the courtyard. I didn't think twice. I just needed somewhere quiet to sleep and work in the evenings. When I arrived, I immediately noticed how old the building was. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and something like old books. The paint on the walls was cracked near the corners, and the wooden steps creaked under my shoes as I climbed. It had a sort of charm to it, the kind of faded European character you expect in an old Berlin block. The door to the flat was heavy, dark wood with a brass handle. Inside, it was dim but neat. The ceilings were high, almost 3 meters, and the windows had those tall white frames that let in gray daylight from the courtyard. The floorboards were scratched and uneven, and they made soft popping sounds when I walked across them. The air was a bit musty, like the place hadn't been aired out for a while. There was a faint smell of detergent mixed with something older, like wet wood. The living room had mismatched furniture, a green corduroy couch, a small coffee table with a water ring on it, and a single lamp that flickered slightly when turned on. There was a shelf of books, all in German, and a framed print of an old Berlin street map on the wall. The kitchen was narrow, just enough room for one person to move around. The bathroom was small but tidy. I remember noticing the old plumbing fixtures, a bit stained, and a mirror with a black edge of corrosion around the bottom. That first night, everything was fine. I unpacked a few clothes, set up my laptop, and made a cup of tea. I worked until around midnight and then went to bed. It was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic from the street below and the occasional sound of footsteps on the stairs outside. The second night was when it started to feel strange. I had gone to bed around 11. I woke up suddenly, not sure why. The clock on my phone said 1:07 a.m. The room was completely still, but I could hear something faint, running water. It was distant, not loud, but clear enough that I could tell it was coming from inside the apartment. It sounded like a tap had been left on somewhere. I got up, half asleep, and went toward the bathroom. The light was off. I pushed the door open and it swung freely. I turned on the light. The sink tap wasn't running, neither was the shower. The toilet wasn't filling or leaking. Everything looked dry. I stood there for a minute, listening, but the sound had stopped. Maybe it had been from another flat. These buildings were old. The pipes carried sound strangely. I turned off the light and went back to bed. The next day was normal. I worked from a cafe near Cottbusser Tor and came back in the evening. The sun didn't set until late, and by the time I got back, the courtyard outside the window was quiet, except for the faint voices of someone smoking downstairs. I ate something simple, watched a show on my laptop, and went to bed around midnight. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. I didn't know the time at first, but the sound was the same, running water. This time it was louder. My heart started to beat faster. It wasn't steady like a pipe leak. It sounded like someone actually turning the shower on and off. I got up and walked quietly to the bathroom door. The air in the hallway felt damp and cooler than before. I reached for the handle and turned it, but it didn't move. The door was locked. From the inside, that made no sense. I was alone. I hadn't locked it. I stood there, my hand still on the handle, trying to understand what was happening. I leaned close and listened. For a few seconds, I thought I heard faint movement, like someone shifting their weight on the tiles. It was so quiet that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but the sound of water was real. There was definitely water moving. I took a step back. The apartment felt suddenly smaller. I checked the front door. It was locked. I looked toward the windows. All closed. I thought maybe the pipes in the wall were connected to another apartment. But I couldn't explain why the bathroom door was locked from the inside. I waited in the living room for a while. Lights on, just sitting on the couch. I tried to listen. Around 2 a.m., the sound faded away. I texted Daniel, the host, asking if anyone else had access to the flat, or if there was something strange with the plumbing. No response. I called him once, straight to voicemail. I didn't sleep much after that. I stayed awake, checking the hallway every so often. Around 4 a.m., I finally decided to pack my things. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside that bathroom. I moved quietly, folding clothes, unplugging chargers, and zipping my bag. I was about to grab my coat from the chair by the living room window when I noticed the hallway light reflecting off something. I looked up. The bathroom door, which had been locked, was now slightly open. I froze. My throat went dry. The air coming from inside was still damp, and the floor near the doorway was wet. A faint smell of soap and steam hung in the air. The light inside was off, but I could see the glisten of moisture on the white tiles. I took one slow step closer and stopped at the threshold. There was no sound now, no one inside that I could see, but the floor was wet, like someone had just showered. The small bath mat was dark with water. I didn't look any further. I picked up my bag, left the key on the kitchen counter, and walked out without turning off the lights. The stairs were quiet except for the echo of my own footsteps. I went straight out to the street, booked a hotel from my phone while standing outside the building, and didn't look back. The next afternoon, I woke up in the hotel, still unsettled. I checked my phone and saw a message from Daniel. It said, "Sorry, the flat has 2 sets of keys." My brother was staying there too. "You must have just missed him." That was all. I stared at the message for a long time. There had been nothing in the listing about another occupant, no mention of shared space, nothing in his earlier messages. The idea that I had been sleeping in the next room while someone else, his brother, supposedly, was using the bathroom in the middle of the night made my stomach twist. I thought about how the door had been locked, how the sound had started and stopped, how the floor had been wet but the light was off. If it really was his brother, why didn't he ever say anything? Why would he wait until I left to come out? And why would Daniel not warn me? I never replied. I left a short review, just that the apartment was not as private as described. Nothing more. But sometimes, even now, I think about that sound of running water in the dark, the damp air drifting from behind the locked door, and the faint, quiet movement I thought I heard that night. I wonder if there really had been another person in there, or if I had been staying in a place where someone never left at all. Either way, I know I'll never book a cheap Airbnb again, no matter how good the reviews look or how normal the pictures seem. That feeling of standing outside a locked door in the middle of the night, knowing someone might be inside, is something I can't forget. In March 2023, I rented a basement suite in Portland's Alberta Arts District. I'd come for a short work trip and everything about the place seemed ideal. Quiet neighborhood, close to coffee shops and galleries, a good price. The listing showed a small but comfortable-looking basement apartment with exposed brick walls, a low ceiling with string lights, and a compact kitchenette tucked into the corner. It looked cozy enough for a few nights. The host's name was Carla. She lived upstairs, but her messages were reassuring. She said I'd have total privacy, and that she'd actually be away that weekend visiting her sister in Eugene. That made the deal even better. When I arrived, it was a little past 6 p.m. The neighborhood was calm, just a few people walking dogs or sitting outside bars. The house itself was an older craftsman-style building painted a deep blue with white trim. The side entrance led down a narrow concrete stairway to a basement door, with a keypad lock. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and detergent, like someone had recently cleaned. The air was cool and slightly damp, which was typical for basements in that part of Portland. The suite was small but well set up. The main area had a rug covering the concrete floor, a love seat, a small TV mounted on the wall, and a bed tucked against the far side near a short window that sat just above ground level. You could see the base of a tree trunk through the window if you crouched a bit. I unpacked, put some food in the mini fridge, and walked around the block before settling in for the night. The first night was fine. I slept deeply after the drive. There was a faint hum from the pipes whenever someone upstairs used the water, but nothing unusual. Around midnight, I heard what I thought was the sound of footsteps above, but they were light, probably just the house creaking or the neighbors next door. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The second night, though, was different. I remember checking the time on my phone, 2:34 a.m., because I woke up to a noise that immediately made me alert. It was the sound of slow, heavy footsteps directly above me. Not quick, purposeful steps, but dragging, uneven ones as if someone was shuffling or limping. The ceiling above the bed vibrated slightly with each step. I stared up, trying to listen. At first, I told myself it was the host. Maybe she'd come back early. But then I remembered her message. She'd said she'd be gone all weekend. I lay still, waiting for the steps to stop. They didn't. They moved from one end of the room to the other, then paused. There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard something else, something rolling across the floor. It wasn't loud but distinct, like a ball or a small round object spinning and coming to a stop. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The noise was right above the kitchenette area. I waited, holding my breath, hoping it would stop. A few seconds later, another slow step, then another. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages to text Carla. I asked if she had come home early, or if someone else was supposed to be there. I watched the screen for a reply. Nothing. I kept listening for a while, frozen in place. The sounds went quiet after a minute or two, but I couldn't tell if whoever it was had left or just stopped moving. The only thing I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I stayed like that for almost an hour, sitting up staring at the ceiling, waiting for any sign of movement. Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off to an uneasy sleep. When I woke up, sunlight was coming through the small window. It was just past 9 a.m. My phone showed no new messages. I decided to go upstairs and check. The interior door that led to the main house was locked from my side, but I had been given a separate key that supposedly worked for both levels. I hesitated before using it, then finally unlocked the door and stepped up into the living room. The air upstairs felt different, stale and oddly cold for the morning. The living room looked normal at first, but something about it made me pause. One of the dining chairs was tipped on its side near the table. A mug lay broken near the kitchen counter, small shards scattered on the floor. The back door, which led to the yard, was wide open. A cool breeze came through, fluttering a paper that was pinned to the fridge with a magnet. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like someone had either left in a hurry, or there'd been a break-in. I didn't see any sign of forced entry, but the door being open unsettled me. I went outside and looked around. The yard was small, fenced with a few overgrown shrubs. There were damp footprints on the porch, half faded by the morning sun. I went back inside, locked the back door, and returned downstairs. I sent another text to Carla explaining what I saw. Still no answer. I checked her Airbnb profile again. It showed she'd last been active 3 days ago. I told myself it was probably fine. Maybe she'd just had a friend or maintenance worker stop by and forget to close the door properly. But something about the scene upstairs didn't fit that explanation. Later that afternoon, around 5 p.m., Carla finally replied. Her message said, "Oh, that's just my roommate. He forgets to mention himself on the listing sometimes. Sorry for the confusion." I stared at that message for a long time. I'd read the listing carefully when I booked. It clearly said entire basement suite, and it made no mention of a roommate. The reviews I'd read had only mentioned Carla. None said anything about another person living there. I checked the listing again to be sure. Nothing had changed. I almost shrugged it off, but something made me scroll down to the reviews again. A new one had appeared that day, someone who had just stayed there a week before. It said, "Great place, but didn't expect someone else sleeping upstairs." That was it. No other details, no complaint, just that one sentence. That night I couldn't relax. Every little sound put me on edge. Around 11 p.m. I made sure the basement door was locked, then placed my shoes and jacket near the bed just in case I needed to leave quickly. I kept the lamp on low, the way you do when you don't want full light but can't stand the dark. I lay there listening. The house made the usual settling noises, pipes clicking, wood creaking. But around midnight I heard something distinct again. Not footsteps this time, but movement. A faint thud followed by a slow dragging sound. It seemed to come from the hallway above, moving from one end to the other, then stopping near the top of the stairs that led down to my door. I held still. The sound stopped. A few seconds passed. Then something brushed against the wall, maybe a hand or a sleeve. I could hear it because the plaster ceiling and the wooden floor above were thin. I looked toward the door, half expecting a shadow to appear under it. I waited like that for almost 10 minutes, my pulse racing, until I finally gathered enough nerve to turn on some music quietly from my phone to break the silence. Eventually the sounds faded. I didn't sleep until dawn. When I got up, I decided to leave. I didn't even wait to see if Carla would message again. I packed my things quickly, checked the locks one more time, and left the key on the counter. As I walked up the basement stairs for the last time, I heard faint movement above. Just a small creak, like someone shifting their weight in the living room. I didn't look up. I just opened the side door, stepped into the cool morning air, and walked straight to my car parked along the curb. When I got home later that day, I checked the listing one more time out of curiosity. It was gone. Either deleted or set to private. Carla's profile was still there, but without any active listings. I scrolled through the cached version of it and saw that the newest review, the one about someone else sleeping upstairs, was gone too. To this day, I don't know who was actually in that house that night. Maybe it really was a roommate. Maybe it was someone who had broken in and left before I woke. I'll never know. But I remember how those footsteps sounded through the ceiling, slow, uneven, dragging. Whoever it was, they were up there, moving in the dark while I lay below, pretending not to hear. Since then, I've never stayed in a basement Airbnb again. I was in Osaka for work in November 2019. The company I worked for had sent me for a short, one-week training program near Namba Station. I didn't want to stay in a hotel because everything around that area was expensive, and I'd seen how clean and modern most Japanese Airbnbs looked online. So I booked a small apartment that looked perfect, modern, minimalist, spotless. The listing had 5 stars and over 50 reviews. It said it was a smart apartment, fully automated with a keypad entry, digital thermostat, and self-check-in. The pictures showed a clean white room, low bed, small kitchenette, and one of those sleek Japanese toilets with built-in control panels. Everything looked perfect. When I arrived in Osaka, it was already dark. The train station was still packed, people moving in every direction, neon signs glowing on every building. It had that organized chaos that Japanese cities have, busy but not loud. The directions from the host were detailed and easy to follow. I found the building without any problem. It was one of those narrow, tall, concrete buildings squeezed between 2 others, with a small elevator and keypad at the entrance. I punched in the code and went up to the 4th floor. The apartment was exactly like the photos. Maybe even better. Everything was white. The walls, the bedding, the counters. The air smelled faintly of detergent and new plastic. There was a little welcome sheet printed in English, telling me how to use the air conditioner, the shower, the garbage separation rules. The host's name on the paper was Tomo. It said I wouldn't need to meet anyone during my stay, and that everything was handled automatically. That suited me fine. I liked being left alone. I unpacked, showered, and went out for a late dinner nearby. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with vending machines and narrow alleys that smelled like grilled meat. When I got back, it was around 11 p.m. The apartment felt colder than before, so I turned on the air conditioner. The room filled with a faint hum and a soft draft of warm air. As I lay on the bed scrolling through my phone, I noticed a small green light above the air conditioner. Just a faint dot glowing in the dark. I assumed it was a sensor or maybe a power indicator. I didn't think much of it at first. The kind of thing you see in every device these days. But after a few minutes, I realized it wasn't where an indicator light usually is. It was slightly off-center near one of the plastic vents. I stared at it for a while. Something about it bothered me. The color of the light looked different, more focused, sharper. It wasn't diffused like a normal LED. Curiosity got the better of me. I turned on the bedside lamp and got up to take a closer look. I dragged a chair from the kitchenette and stood on it. The light went out as soon as I got close. I frowned, thinking maybe I'd blocked a sensor with my shadow. I leaned in until my face was inches from the plastic casing. That's when I saw it. A tiny round opening drilled into the plastic, no bigger than a pencil eraser. Behind the hole was a small glass circle. A lens. I froze. It took a few seconds for my brain to really process it. It was a camera. A small, hidden camera, carefully drilled into the air conditioner cover. I climbed down slowly, my heart pounding. I stood in the middle of the room trying to think. My first thought was maybe it was part of the air conditioner's sensor system, but I'd never seen anything like that before. And the way it was positioned, it was angled slightly downward, facing the bed. That's when panic set in. I started checking everything. The smoke detector above the bed looked slightly crooked. I climbed on the chair again and twisted it gently. It moved too easily, like it had been taken apart before. Inside, behind the plastic grate, I saw another tiny circle of glass. Another camera lens. By now, my hands were shaking. I moved to the power outlet near the small desk and saw a faint reflection. Another pinhole. I used my phone's flashlight to check. Hidden lens again. 3 cameras all pointing toward the bed area. It didn't feel real. The room that had felt so clean and perfect suddenly felt like a trap. Every surface seemed suspicious. I unplugged my phone and stuffed it in my pocket, afraid even the charging port could be compromised. I pulled my backpack from the closet and began throwing my things inside as fast as I could. I left the lights off. I didn't want whoever was behind those cameras to see what I was doing. When I stepped into the hallway, my pulse was racing. I locked the door behind me and took the elevator down to the street. It was almost midnight. The air outside was cold, damp, and quiet. I stood there on the sidewalk, unsure where to go. I ended up walking to the nearest capsule hotel I could find. They had 1 bed left for the night. I checked in without explaining anything. I lay in the capsule, wide awake, listening to the faint sound of other travelers snoring through the walls. The next morning, I contacted Airbnb through their website. I tried to sound calm, but my message probably read like a panic rant. I explained what I'd seen and attached photos I'd taken, close-ups of the drilled holes in the lenses. They replied a few hours later with a generic response. "Thank you for reporting this. We take these matters very seriously. We will investigate." I asked for a refund, which they processed immediately. They told me they'd contact the host and take action if anything illegal was found. I asked if they'd inform the police, but they didn't answer that part. A few days later, the listing was gone from the site. When I tried to look it up again, it said, "This listing is no longer available." I assumed they had removed it. I tried to forget about it after that. I told a few coworkers, but it felt embarrassing, like I'd been careless. One of them said hidden cameras were common in some Airbnbs, especially in Asia. That made me feel worse. Every hotel room or Airbnb I stayed in after that, I checked every vent, smoke detector, and wall plug before unpacking. Months passed. Then around February 2020, a coworker who often traveled to Japan told me he'd booked an Airbnb in Osaka near Namba Station. We were having coffee, and he showed me the photos. My stomach dropped immediately. The same white walls, the same minimalist kitchen, the same air conditioner mounted in the same spot above the bed, even the same pattern on the curtains. The only difference was the host name. It wasn't Tomo anymore, it was Aya. The listing title was different too, and the price was slightly higher. But it was unmistakably the same apartment. I told him not to book it, that I'd stayed there and found cameras. He looked surprised but canceled it without asking many questions. Later that night, I searched Airbnb again. The listing was live, with a new set of reviews from December and January. People praising how clean and modern it was, how private the stay felt, how perfect the location was. Reading those reviews made my skin crawl. It meant someone had set everything up again. New host profile, new guests, same cameras still watching. I reported the listing again, sent the new link and screenshots to Airbnb support. This time I didn't get a reply. The page was still up for weeks after that. Then one day when I checked again, it was gone. I never found out who the real host was. I never heard back from Airbnb or the police. But I kept the photos I took that night, the ones showing the lenses. Sometimes when I look at them now, I can see my own reflection faintly captured in the glass, standing on that chair, holding my phone, staring into something that was staring right back at me. I still travel for work, but I've stopped using Airbnb completely. Hotels might be expensive, but at least there's a front desk, cameras you can see, people you can talk to. Every time I think about that apartment, I picture how many others must have stayed there after me. How many people undressed, slept, showered, never knowing they were being watched. That thought bothers me the most, that it probably never really stopped. Just changed names, changed hosts, moved a few listings over, and somewhere in Osaka, behind another clean white wall and another glowing green light, that same hidden lens might still be recording. It was late September 2021 when I rented a small one-bedroom Airbnb in Halifax's North End. I'd come for a short work trip, 4 nights total, and wanted something quiet, nothing fancy. The listing described it as a converted garage apartment behind a family home. The photos looked fine. White walls, clean sheets, a little kitchenette with a toaster oven and kettle. It wasn't expensive, which helped, and the reviews were decent. A few people said it was cozy and private, though one person mentioned that the host lives nearby, which I didn't think much about at the time. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the light was starting to fade. The North End was quiet that day. Narrow streets, a mix of old houses and newer ones squeezed between them. The main house looked ordinary. Blue siding with white trim, a small garden out front. The apartment was in the back through a narrow driveway. The garage had been converted neatly enough. There was a small porch light, a keypad lock, and a couple of steps up to the door. I punched in the code the host had sent and went inside. The space smelled faintly of detergent and something older beneath it, maybe the wood of the garage. There was a small living room with a couch facing a TV stand, a kitchenette tucked along one wall, and a short hallway leading to the bedroom. Everything was compact, simple, and a little bare. A couple of framed prints hung crookedly on the wall. The window blinds were thin, letting in the streetlights from behind the house. I unpacked, made tea, and sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. It was quiet, too quiet almost. I could hear faint sounds from the main house now and then. Footsteps, a door closing, water running through the pipes. Nothing out of the ordinary. Around 10, I went to bed. The first night was peaceful. I slept surprisingly well. The bed was small but comfortable enough. I woke once around 2 a.m. because of a noise outside, maybe a car door or wind against the siding. But it was brief. I drifted back to sleep easily. The second day passed normally. I worked from my laptop most of the morning, then walked to grab a coffee from a nearby cafe. Halifax in September had that cool, damp air that seeps into your clothes, but it felt good to be outside. When I got back, I noticed the backyard between the apartment and the main house had a few scattered items. A rusted bicycle leaning against the fence, an old lawn chair tipped on its side, a couple of empty flower pots. It gave the place a slightly neglected feel, like no one had really cared about it for a while. That evening, I microwaved a frozen dinner, watched some videos, and tried to relax. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and got into bed. It was chilly, so I wrapped the thin comforter around me tightly. I remembered checking my phone one last time before falling asleep. 37 a.m. I woke again sometime later. The first thing I noticed was how dark it was. The faint orange glow from the street light behind the blinds had dimmed, probably blocked by clouds. The room was completely still. I couldn't tell what had woken me at first. I lay there listening. Then I heard it, a soft creak from near the front door. It wasn't loud, just enough to make my stomach tighten. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Old wood, temperature change, maybe wind moving the frame. The door was only a few steps from where the bed was. I could see the faint outline of it from where I lay. I stared at it for a long time, waiting. Then I saw the handle move. It turned slowly, just a fraction at first, then a bit more. I froze completely. My body locked up, my breathing shallow. I wanted to say something, to make a noise, but my throat wouldn't work. I watched as the handle turned all the way down, and the latch clicked softly. The door opened an inch, then two. There was no sound of wind, no draft, just that steady movement. A shadow appeared in the gap, a head, a face. A man's face, unshaven, pale, tired-looking. His eyes scanned the room slowly, adjusting to the dark. For a few seconds he didn't see me. Then he did. Our eyes met. He looked just as startled as I felt, but not panicked, more like confused. He stood there half in the doorway, breathing quietly. Then in a low, rough voice he said, "Oh, wrong room." And just like that he stepped back, pulled the door closed, and it clicked shut. I stayed frozen for what felt like minutes. I couldn't process what had just happened. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. It didn't. When I finally reached for my phone, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I checked the time, 3:12 a.m., and immediately tried calling the host. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to open the door. The apartment had only one exit, the same door he had just opened. The windows were too small to climb through. I turned on the lamp beside the bed and just sat there, staring at the door, listening for any sound. Every creak of the building made me flinch. I thought I heard faint footsteps outside at one point. Maybe on gravel, maybe not. I sat like that until the first light started to appear through the blinds. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything in silence. I kept checking the door, half expecting it to open again. I stepped outside carefully, scanning the yard and the space between the garage apartment and the main house. There was no one. The air was cold, damp from overnight rain. I walked straight to my car and sat there for a while before starting it. I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My phone buzzed around 8:30 a.m. A text from the host. She wrote, "Sorry, I didn't see your calls." That must have been my ex. He doesn't realize I rent the space sometimes, that was it. No apology, no explanation. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. I drove to a nearby diner, got a coffee, and sat there trying to calm down. I kept replaying the moment. The sound of the handle turning, the door opening, the face in the dark. The way he said it, like he genuinely thought he was in the right place. But what haunted me wasn't just that he'd been there. It was how quietly he'd done it, how easily he'd gotten in. The lock had been a keypad. He must have known the code. That meant the host hadn't changed it, or worse, had shared it with him at some point. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable that little apartment was. The door had no deadbolt, no chain, no peephole. If he had wanted to come in again, he could have. I didn't even want to think about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. I decided I wasn't spending another night there. I drove straight to a hotel downtown and booked a room for the rest of my stay. When the receptionist handed me the key card, and I heard the solid click of the deadbolt later that night, I felt something close to relief. I reported the incident through the Airbnb app, explaining exactly what happened, attaching a screenshot of the text message from the host. They opened a safety investigation, refunded the remaining nights, and removed the listing within a few days. But even after all that, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face appearing in the doorway. It wasn't just shock, it was something else in his eyes. A kind of dull familiarity, like he'd been there before. For the rest of that trip, I kept double-checking every lock, every latch, every time I went to sleep. Even after coming home, I caught myself doing it. It's strange how fast something like that changes the way you see ordinary things. Doors, locks, the sound of footsteps outside. I never heard anything more from the host or from Airbnb about what happened. Maybe they contacted her, maybe not. But I know what I saw that night. I know what it felt like to wake up in that dark room and see someone else standing there, inches from stepping inside. And the worst part is knowing how easily it happened. How one wrong code, one careless host, one unlocked door can turn an ordinary night in a quiet rental into something you'll remember every time you close your eyes. It was early February of 2020 when I booked the cottage in Bath. I was spending a few weeks traveling across the UK, trying to see as much as I could before heading back home. The Airbnb listing caught my eye because of its photos. Old stone walls, ivy creeping up one side, and a small iron gate that opened into a courtyard. It looked peaceful, tucked away from the main roads. The host, a woman named Marjorie, said she lived nearby, and that the place was perfect for solo travelers. The price was decent, so I booked 3 nights. When I arrived, the air was cold and damp. The street was narrow and quiet, lined with old terraces that leaned slightly toward each other. The cottage sat behind a short stone wall with a wooden door painted deep green. Inside, it was small but charming. Low beams, uneven floors, a small fireplace that smelled faintly of ash. A framed painting of Bath Abbey hung over the mantel, and an old clock ticked slowly on the wall. The place had that musty scent that old houses get, a mix of dust and damp wood. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked my bag, made tea, and listened to the wind pressing against the windows. There was an electric heater by the bed that made a quiet buzzing sound when it ran, which actually helped me sleep. I remember thinking it was one of the coziest places I had stayed during the trip. The next evening, after walking around town most of the day, I came back sore and tired. The sky had turned a dull gray, and drizzle had started falling. I made some instant soup in the little kitchenette and ate while scrolling through photos from earlier that day. Everything felt still. No cars passing outside, no sounds from neighboring houses. Just the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Around 11 p.m., I turned in for the night. The bedroom was upstairs, a small space with sloped ceilings and a tiny window that looked out over the garden. The bed was against one wall, and just above it, a dark wooden beam ran across the ceiling. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime in the night, I woke up. It was still dark, but I wasn't sure why I had woken. Then I heard it, a faint sound from above. At first it was light, like a small animal shifting. I figured it was mice. The house was old, so that made sense. I pulled the blanket up and waited for it to stop. But then it came again, slower this time, heavier. Not the light scurrying of mice, but a distinct movement, weight shifting across old boards. It sounded like someone crawling. I froze. The attic, I remembered, was just above my room. There wasn't a door to it inside the bedroom, just a small square panel in the hallway ceiling. I lay there, staring up, listening. The movement continued, soft but deliberate, and the boards creaked as if under someone's knees. After a few minutes, it went quiet. I told myself it was just my imagination, and eventually drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I went into town and tried not to think about it. But later, when I saw Marjorie outside the gate, pruning a bush near the front, I mentioned it. She was an older woman, gray hair tucked under a scarf, wearing thick gloves. She smiled and said the attic hadn't been used in years. Probably just wind, she said. That night, I double-checked the windows before going to bed. The heater buzzed softly again. But the house felt different now, like there was something just out of sight. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. No reason. Just awake. It was completely silent for a moment, and then I heard it. The same sound. A slow drag, like something heavy being shifted across wood. Then small movements, short, careful ones right above me. My heart started pounding. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight outside stretching across the plaster. The sound was close. Too close. It wasn't just the wind. The boards flexed slightly, and dust fell from between the beams, landing on the dresser beside me. I stood up on the bed and tapped the ceiling with my hand just once. Everything went still. Total silence. I stayed like that for a long time, barely breathing, waiting to hear if it would start again. It didn't. Eventually, I got back under the blanket, every muscle tight, staring at the ceiling until morning light crept through the window. When I got up, there was a thin layer of dust on top of the dresser that hadn't been there before. Little specks spread unevenly, like something had disturbed the boards above. The air smelled faintly of dust and wood rot. I packed my things slowly, feeling watched even though I was alone. Downstairs, the air was cooler, and the faint sound of the old clock filled the room. I wrote a short message to Marjorie saying I'd be leaving early. She replied later, saying she hoped everything was all right. Before leaving, I glanced one last time at the ceiling near the hallway where the attic hatch was. There was a faint dark smudge around the edges, as if the panel had been moved slightly. I didn't touch it. I drove out of Bath that afternoon. The rain had started again, and the narrow streets glistened under the gray sky. I remember feeling a strange relief as I got farther from the cottage, like shaking off a weight I hadn't realized was on me. Later that evening, I checked the Airbnb reviews again, just out of curiosity. Most were normal, people praising the location, the charm, the cleanliness. But one caught my eye from a year earlier. It said, "Lovely cottage, very cozy. Only odd thing was some noise from the attic at night." Marjorie said it was probably the wind. That line stuck with me. I kept thinking about how distinct the sounds had been. The way the boards creaked, the rhythm of the movement. Wind doesn't sound like that. It doesn't crawl. Weeks later, long after I was back home, I still thought about that cottage. The way the dust had fallen on the dresser, the faint dark mark around the attic hatch, and the quiet, careful way the noise had stopped when I touched the ceiling. I started wondering about that attic. What was actually up there? The listing photos didn't show any attic, of course. I even looked on maps, found the same cottage from street view, and zoomed in on the roofline. There was a small, narrow window just below the eaves. Not big enough for much, but enough for someone to look out from. I'll never know for sure what I heard. Maybe someone had been living up there without Marjorie realizing. Maybe she knew. The house was old, and it wouldn't be hard for someone to get in through a side access or from the garden roof. But the part that still unsettles me most isn't the noise or the dust. It's how deliberate it all felt. The slow crawl, the dragging, and the way it stopped completely the moment I acknowledged it, like whoever or whatever it was had been listening to me too. For the music festival in March 2024, I booked a duplex Airbnb in East Austin. It looked perfect in the listing. Modern furniture, simple but stylish decor, good lighting, and a short drive from downtown. The host's name was Lucas. His profile photo showed a guy in his mid-30s, bald, smiling, standing in front of a barbecue grill. Reviews said he was laid back and hands-off. That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't care about meeting anyone. I just needed a clean place to sleep between shows. When I arrived, the key was under the mat as promised. The duplex sat on a quiet residential street, one of those older Austin neighborhoods where every other house had been flipped, mixes of new metal fences and old cracked driveways. The place had a small front yard with patchy grass and a single oak tree that bent over the walkway. The door opened into a living room with polished concrete floors and white walls. There was a gray sectional couch, a TV mounted on the wall, and a narrow kitchen with stainless steel appliances. Everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, which I liked. I remember thinking the space looked exactly like the photos, maybe even better. There were framed prints of city skylines and plants on floating shelves. 2 bedrooms, one on each floor. I chose the downstairs one because it had blackout curtains and easy access to the fridge. I unpacked, showered, and went straight to the first night of the festival. The next 2 days were great. The weather was warm but not unbearable, and everything about the Airbnb seemed normal. I'd get back late each night, exhausted from walking and music and cheap beer, and crash immediately. I always double-checked the door before bed, because I'd heard stories about break-ins in East Austin. I'm a bit paranoid that way. Used to live in an apartment where someone tried to steal a bike from the hallway, so I remember locking the door every night, even testing it twice before heading to bed. On the third night, I came back from a show around midnight. I was buzzing a little from the music, tired but in a good mood. When I reached the door, I noticed right away that the deadbolt was turned the wrong way. The handle turned freely. The door was unlocked. I froze for a second, staring at it. My first thought was that maybe I'd been careless, but I knew I wasn't. I'd locked it. I always locked it. I pushed the door open slowly. The living room lights were off, just the streetlight outside casting a dim glow through the blinds. Everything looked the same at first glance. The couch, my jacket on the armrest, my phone charger on the counter. But when I turned toward the kitchen, the fridge door was wide open. Inside, a few things had shifted. I had a couple of beers in there, some leftovers, a bottle of water. One of the beers was missing. It didn't feel right. The air inside the place was warmer than usual, as if someone had been moving around just recently. I checked the bedrooms, the bathroom, even the small laundry closet, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. No one was there. Nothing was broken. Still, the open fridge and missing beer made it clear someone had been inside. I didn't know whether to call the police or the host first. I decided to text Lucas. I kept it short. Just said that the door was unlocked when I got back and the fridge was open. A few minutes later, he replied, saying he'd stopped by to grab something quick and hoped I didn't mind. That was it. No warning, no call. I remember standing in the kitchen with my phone in hand, feeling a mix of irritation and unease. Technically, it was his property, but the way he'd just let himself in while I was renting it, without notice, felt off. I asked what he took. He answered after a while, "Just my laptop charger." I didn't reply. I didn't want to keep talking. I just locked the door again, checked the windows, and tried to calm down. It was late and I was tired. I told myself maybe he really did just grab a charger and a beer without thinking. Maybe he lived nearby and thought it was fine. It still bothered me, though. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been moving around in there while I was gone. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every small sound, the refrigerator motor, the house settling, a car outside, made me tense up. Around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The other bedroom door upstairs, which I'd left open since the first night, was now slightly closed. Not shut, but pulled in just enough that I could see the shadowed edge along the frame. I told myself Lucas might have gone in there to look for his charger. Maybe he stayed upstairs briefly. I didn't want to think too deeply about it. I used the bathroom, came back, locked the door again, and lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling. In the morning, daylight made things feel less strange. I brewed coffee and started packing up my stuff. My checkout was supposed to be the next day, but I decided I'd rather leave early. I didn't trust that he wouldn't come back again while I was out. I began gathering things, folding clothes and stripping the bed. That's when I saw it. On the pillow of the other bed in the second bedroom, a long, dark hair, curled slightly at the end. It stood out against the white pillowcase like it didn't belong there. I just stared at it for a while, trying to piece it together. I'm bald. Lucas was bald in his profile photo. The reviews mentioned him briefly, none ever mentioning a partner. It wasn't like a stray hair that might have been missed during cleaning. It was right in the center of the pillow, clear and recent. I checked the rest of the room. The sheets looked freshly pressed, but the corner of the comforter was rumpled, like someone had sat or lain on it. I looked around for any signs, smell, clothing, anything, but the room was empty. At that point, I didn't even feel angry. I just felt weirdly exposed, like I'd been living in someone else's space without knowing it. I packed everything faster and put my bag by the door. Before leaving, I walked through the rooms one more time. Nothing else seemed touched, but I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Lucas hadn't come alone that night. Maybe someone else had been there, Maybe they'd stayed longer than he said. I left the key on the counter, locked the door, and didn't look back. I got a motel room a few miles away for the last night of the festival. It was a cheap, ugly place off the highway, but I felt safer there than in that duplex. A week later, back home, I kept thinking about it. Curiosity got the better of me, so I opened Airbnb and searched the address again, wanting to see if anyone had left new reviews or if Lucas had updated his profile. But when I typed it in, nothing came up. The listing was gone. His host profile too. Just gone. It bothered me more than it should have. Not because I wanted to complain, but because it felt like the place had just vanished. I went through my email, clicked the old confirmation link. It led to an error page. The address still existed, obviously, but whatever account it had been listed under wasn't active anymore. For a few days, I kept thinking about the unlocked door, the open fridge, the beer, that single hair on the pillow. None of it made sense in a simple way. Maybe Lucas had someone else staying there off the record. Maybe he'd rented the second room to someone under the table. Maybe he was living there part-time and just didn't tell anyone. Or maybe he'd walked in that night with someone thinking I wouldn't be back until late, and realized too late that my things were there. I'll never know. I tried to rationalize it, but the more I thought about it, the less it added up. The missing beer, the locked door turned the wrong way, the bedroom that seemed used. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing dangerous happened. But I can still remember the air in that house when I first walked in that night. The strange stillness. The feeling that someone had just been standing there moments before I opened the door. Now, whenever I rent an Airbnb, I always check for a second lock on the inside. Something I can control, not just a deadbolt anyone else has a key to. And I never ever assume that a missing listing means nothing happened. Sometimes people just erase things when they don't want to answer questions. In July 2022, I rented a small cottage in Christchurch for a photography trip. I had been looking for somewhere quiet, somewhere I could unwind after long days exploring the coastline and taking photos of old architecture. The listing looked perfect. White painted walls, a small garden, and a driveway tucked between two hedges. The host had mentioned in the description that the driveway was shared, but I didn't think much of it. I assumed it just meant neighbors parked nearby, or that I'd have to move my car occasionally. When I arrived, I realized the other unit was closer than I'd imagined. It was directly behind mine, barely 10 feet away. Almost like a twin cottage, but set at an angle so the front doors didn't face each other. It didn't look occupied. No curtains open, no lights on, no car parked outside. The host wasn't there to greet me. She'd left the key under a flower pot by the door. The place was clean enough. Smelled faintly of detergent and damp wood. Simple furniture, creaky floors. A small window looking out over the shared gravel driveway. I unpacked, cooked some food, and spent the evening editing photos on my laptop while rain started to fall outside. Around midnight, I heard the sound of a car engine. It was slow and steady, the kind of idle hum you recognize instantly in the stillness of night. I thought maybe one of the neighbors was returning home late. I ignored it for a while, but after a few minutes, I realized the car wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, idling. The sound came from right outside my window. I lifted the blinds just enough to peek out. There was a white Toyota parked in the driveway. Headlights off, just the faint glow of its dashboard lighting up the windshield. I couldn't see who was inside, but the car wasn't turned off. It sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, before it slowly reversed out without turning on the lights and disappeared down the road. I tried not to think too much about it. Maybe someone was lost. Maybe a delivery driver checking directions. Still, it unsettled me. The next morning, I looked for any sign that someone lived in the rear unit. Curtains were drawn. The front steps were wet from the rain, but no footprints, no car, no lights that night either. The next evening, after a day shooting along the coast, I got back just before sunset. It was quiet. I ate, showered, and started sorting through my camera gear for the next day. Sometime after midnight, I heard that same sound again. The soft gravel crunch, the idle hum. My heart started beating faster. I turned off my laptop screen so the room went dark and went to the window again. Same car, same white Toyota. Headlights off, parked at an angle near the hedge. The driver wasn't moving. I stood there for a while, waiting for the car to leave, but it didn't. It just sat there. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't tell if someone was watching the cottage. Eventually, I pulled the blinds closed and tried to go back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every small noise outside, the wind against the gutter, the occasional drip from the eaves, sounded like footsteps on gravel. By the third night, I had convinced myself it was some local, using the driveway as a place to park and use their phone. I told myself not to overthink it, but when it happened again, same time, same spot, I couldn't ignore how deliberate it seemed. Around 12:15 a.m., I heard the engine again. This time, I didn't go to the window right away. I sat in bed listening. The sound didn't fade, just stayed there, steady, low, constant. Finally, I stood up, turned off the last light in the room, and moved to the window. The Toyota was back. Parked even closer this time, just outside my window. My heart thudded in my ears as I tried to make out any movement. The driver's side window was down slightly, and I thought I saw the outline of someone inside, still motionless. I waited. After several minutes, the engine cut off. Silence. The sound of gravel shifting as the driver stepped out. I froze. I could see a shape move along the side of the car. A man. Hood up, hands in pockets, head tilted slightly toward my cottage. He stood there for a moment, facing my direction. I couldn't see his face, just a dark silhouette in the faint light from the neighboring street lamp. Then, without any sound, he got back into the car, started it again, reversed down the driveway and left. I stayed awake for hours that night, listening for any return. None came. The next morning, I checked outside in daylight. There were tire marks on the gravel, fresh, the kind that weren't there the day before. I considered messaging the host, but part of me felt silly. I didn't have proof of anything except a car parked in a shared driveway. Still, I sent a message asking if someone else was using the property, or if she knew who might be driving a white Toyota. She replied a few hours later saying, "Oh, that's my cousin. He watches the property sometimes." Something about that message didn't feel right. It was too casual. If her cousin was watching the property, why didn't she mention it in the listing or when I checked in? Why always at midnight? Why sit with the engine running, headlights off? That night I couldn't focus on editing photos. Every creak made me flinch. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains tight, and left a lamp on in the main room. I set my camera near the window, hoping to catch any sign of movement. Midnight came, and sure enough, I heard the gravel again. Slow, careful, deliberate. The car stopped. Engine idling. I turned on the video recording on my phone and crept closer to the window. I didn't move the blinds this time, just waited. The sound of the engine stopped after a few minutes, and silence filled the space again. I could hear my own breathing. Then a faint sound, like shoes brushing over gravel. Closer. I realized he wasn't staying in the car this time. I stepped back from the window and turned off the phone light. My pulse was racing. Through a thin gap in the blinds, I saw him again. Hood up, walking slowly between the two units. He moved like he knew where everything was. He didn't carry a flashlight, just walked in the dark, pausing every few steps. He stopped near the rear unit's door, looked toward my cottage, then turned away and went behind the other building. I waited, nothing. No more footsteps. No car leaving. Just silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the main room with my camera tripod clutched like a weapon. Around 3 a.m., I finally looked outside again. The car was gone. By morning, I'd made up my mind to leave. I didn't even finish my stay. I packed my gear, loaded my car, and checked the gravel one last time. Footprints, large, muddy, leading around the side of the rear unit and stopping just behind my bedroom window. When I messaged the host to tell her I was checking out early, she didn't reply. Hours later, after I'd already driven out of Christchurch, she finally sent a short message. No worries. My cousin said everything was fine. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just that I didn't argue. I never left a review. Never asked for a refund. But I kept thinking about that phrase. He watches the property sometimes. The way she said it, like it was normal. Like I wasn't supposed to be concerned. Weeks later, when I looked up the listing again out of curiosity, it was gone. Deleted. The photo of the cottage no longer appeared in search results. I still don't know who that man was. Maybe it really was her cousin. Maybe he thought he was doing security rounds. But the way he moved, the way he stood in silence by my window, and the fact that he came back every single night, it didn't feel like anyone protecting anything. It felt like someone watching, waiting, trying to see how close they could get without being caught. Sometimes, when I edit photos late at night and hear a car outside, I still think about that sound, the low idle of that white Toyota, and how close it came, how long it waited in the dark without reason. In August 2023, I booked a loft apartment in Wicker Park for a week. It was supposed to be a quiet work trip, just me and my laptop. The listing had dozens of glowing reviews. People talking about how modern and spotless it was, how easy the keyless entry system made check-in, and how close it was to Division Street. The photos showed big windows, polished wood floors, exposed brick, soft lighting, plants in every corner. It looked like the kind of place you'd see in a design magazine. When I arrived in Chicago, it was late afternoon. The sun was still up, but the heat had turned heavy and humid. The rideshare dropped me off in front of a narrow 3-story building, wedged between 2 restaurants. The address matched exactly. The entry was a metal door with a small keypad next to it. I typed in the code the host had sent me, and the light turned green with a click. Inside, it was darker than I expected. The stairway smelled like bleach and something faintly metallic. The light overhead flickered once when I walked in. The hallway paint was chipped, and there were faint scuff marks on the wall, like someone had dragged boxes or furniture recently. I remember thinking it didn't look as polished as the photos, but sometimes listings exaggerate. The loft was on the 2nd floor. I entered the code again on another keypad, and the door unlocked. The air inside was cool, but it hit me immediately that something was off. The smell of bleach was stronger here, mixed with a hint of dampness. The space felt smaller, darker. The big windows in the photos were covered with cheap blinds. The furniture was different too. A plain gray sofa instead of the caramel leather one in the listing. A wobbly metal table instead of the sleek wooden dining set. I checked the email confirmation again to make sure I was in the right place. The address matched. The check-in time, the code, everything matched. My name was listed in the check-in app. I figured maybe the host redecorated or the photos were from an earlier version. I unpacked, trying to ignore how strange it felt. The fridge was nearly empty except for a half-used bottle of mustard and an old takeout box. The bathroom mirror had streaks on it, and one of the ceiling lights buzzed when I turned it on. The place didn't feel cleaned for a guest. It felt wiped down quickly, just enough to look acceptable at first glance. I tried to convince myself it was fine. That night I sat at the small table near the window and worked for a while. The street outside was quiet, only the sound of a few cars passing. Around 10 p.m. I made tea and sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. The apartment felt lonelier by then, like it didn't belong to anyone. The air conditioner hummed unevenly. I double-checked that the door was locked. The keypad light turned red when I pressed it, meaning it was secure. I went to bed around midnight. The bedroom was a small lofted space above the main area, reachable by a short set of metal stairs. The mattress was thin but fine for a few nights. I left a small lamp on because I didn't like how dark the corners looked. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and something underneath that I couldn't name, like wet drywall or mildew. At some point in the night, I woke up. I didn't know what time it was at first, but the streetlights outside made faint lines across the blinds. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the fridge. Then I heard it, a faint mechanical sound. A beep, then another. I froze. It was coming from the front door. The sound was distant but clear, the keypad beeping as someone pressed numbers. I thought maybe it was just the system resetting or someone in the hallway mistyping their own code. But then I heard the latch click. I sat up in bed instantly, heart pounding. The sound of the lock turning was unmistakable. The door opened slowly. The hinges creaked, and faint streetlight spilled across the living room floor. I could see the shape of someone standing there, framed by the doorway. I shouted something without even thinking. Just a startled noise that echoed in the room. The figure froze. For a second, neither of us moved. I saw the outline of a man wearing a jacket, holding something in his hand. Keys, maybe. Then he spoke, voice low but clear, and it made my stomach twist. He said this was his apartment. The words didn't make sense at first. My mind was still trying to process the fact that someone had walked into what I thought was my rental. I told him I had booked it on Airbnb. I pulled up the app on my phone and showed him the listing. The photos, the address, my name, all of it matched. He stepped closer into the light from the hallway, and I could see the confusion on his face. He wasn't aggressive, just stunned. He said he lived here, that no one was supposed to be renting his place. He looked around, and I could tell from his expression that everything in the apartment was exactly as he left it. The furniture, the blinds, the table. The bleach smell made sense then. He must have cleaned earlier that day, not knowing someone else would be let in. We both started realizing what had happened at the same time. Someone had copied his entire Airbnb listing, his photos, his description, even the lock system. The hacker had used the same keyless entry platform, generating access codes that looked legitimate. The fake host had confirmed my booking, sent me check-in instructions, and taken the payment. The man said he used a popular keyless entry app to let friends or maintenance workers in when he wasn't home. Apparently, that system had a known security flaw. Someone had gained access to his property remotely and linked it to a fake Airbnb profile. That's how I got in without any issue. The app recognized the code even though it wasn't his doing. The police came not long after we both called. I sat on the couch while they asked questions, trying to piece together what had happened. They checked his ID and confirmed his lease. My booking confirmation was still active in the app, showing that I was supposed to be there until Sunday. The listing was gone by morning, completely erased. Whoever had made it must have deleted everything once the incident happened. Airbnb refunded me within a day, apologizing for what they called a sophisticated scam. They said they were investigating, but I never heard any follow-up. The man whose apartment it was changed his locks that same night. I packed my things and left for a hotel nearby, still shaky from the whole thing. For the rest of the trip, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The sound of the keypad beeping, the door opening, that moment of confusion when we both realized the truth. I kept thinking about how easy it was for it to happen. All it took was someone copying photos, linking a smart lock, and pretending to be a host. No alarms, no signs that anything was wrong. When I think back, there were small details I should have noticed. The furniture not matching. The smell of bleach, maybe from someone cleaning up before coming home. The fact that there were personal items missing. No books, no small decorations. Nothing that made it feel like a real rental. It was just an apartment caught in between being lived in and being staged. I've stayed in Airbnbs since then, but I always check twice now. I look up the address, cross-check the listing photos with satellite views, and make sure the host's profile has a long history. I never use keyless entries anymore, only places that hand over real keys in person. Sometimes I still think about that night though. About how if I hadn't woken up when I did, he might have walked in while I was asleep, just as confused and startled. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. But the idea sticks with me, that the locks, the reviews, the whole system that's supposed to make you feel safe can be undone by a few lines of stolen code. That loft in Wicker Park is still listed on Airbnb, but under a different host now. The photos are new. Different furniture, brighter lighting, new reviews. I don't know if it's the same apartment or just another copy. I'll never really know. But every time I see a listing that looks too perfect, I remember how easy it was to walk into someone else's life by accident. and how easy it could have gone a lot worse.